Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the Great War, the Western Front, made by Petroglyph, who are renowned for their strategy games, both the ones they've made under their own name, or at least some of the ones they've made under their own name. Specifically, Empire at War gets a great deal of praise from people because of what they did. It's actually one of the best Star Wars games ever made. And of course, the games that they made before becoming Petroglyph when they were Westwood. So Petroglyph has a great deal of very positive reputation. And now they've decided to release this particular title, The Great War, Western Front. Now, looking at this game when it was announced, I was a bit skeptical about the World War I game, because World War I was fought in trenches. It had battles that lasted months. It had enormous casualties. How do you translate that into a video game form? And it's actually something a lot of video games have struggled to properly replicate. Yes, Battlefield 1 was an amazing game in a lot of respects, but it had its own issues. And then we get this game. This is a front line. It is nigh on impregnable for both sides. To penetrate this particular front line requires a significant amount of resources. Now, let's talk a bit about the campaign map. So, I like the fact that you have a proper front line as existed in World War I. I like the fact that it is difficult to breach and it requires a lot of commitment. You might have battles for very little gain, but there are issues on this campaign map. Or issues in execution, not necessarily on ideas. Like, the ideas they have are great, but the problem is, of course, execution. So, you can purchase units, or rather purchase aircraft, artillery, certain units. You get research, you get various agent actions, all that kind of good stuff. In this respect, it very much feels like a Total War game, and maybe even what a Total War game should be from this perspective. So there's a lot of great things over here. You don't have to deal with economy, not in the normal way you might think about it. You'll get money every single month. You'll get resources every single month, and you have to decide how you're going to allocate them on the front line. You can't afford to lose territory because that affects your national will. So the game really feels, on the campaign side of things, on the campaign map side of things, really feels like a World War I game should be. In the sense that you're not going to achieve victory in the campaign by just going onto an individual battle, killing a bunch of enemies, and that's going to succeed. No. You have to plan a war, and you have to fight a war, and you have to deal with resources on the entire war front. You have to commit resources, soldiers, supplies, hospitals. You have to decide which section of the front line you're going to reinforce, which section you're not going to reinforce. Where are you going to attack, and with what units? And if the enemy is about to attack you, or has already attacked you in one turn, do you decide to send reinforcements on that front to help stabilize the situation, or do you decide to send those reinforcements elsewhere to do an offensive move? That is great. That genuinely is good. Like, I don't really have anything negative to say about the campaign map. It achieves its purpose. It really gives you that sense of the front line of World War I. It feels appropriate. It feels great to have a game where you don't just constantly take and lose territory. That's not how this game works. That's not how this game should be like. However, unfortunately, there are going to be quite a lot of issues with this. First off, let's talk about the obvious. The auto resolve is bad, as in ridiculously bad. You look at this force. This has a German air wing, a siege artillery unit, 2 siege artillery unit, and 5 infantry corps. There's only 2 corps over here, and I can assault this from multiple directions, Chatillon, and it's unlikely that I would lose, but I still do. I still do, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. If I were to fight that battle manually, I can assure you that that outcome would not occur, for many obvious reasons. A player is much better at this. This is one of the problems with these games that rely on auto-resolve. If the auto-resolve is just bad, or if the auto-resolve is incredibly punishing, it can create a lot of significant issues. But let's talk a bit about the battles. The battles themselves, on an individual level, are also fairly appropriate to World War I. You can get swarms of troops, throw them at the enemy, and they will all die. The enemy can do the exact same. You can feel a bit insane, actually, and really great when you see the swarm of infantry coming towards you, and you know they're all gonna die. None of them are gonna do anything, just as it did happen in World War I. You just wipe out entire companies, brigades, regiments. You're just annihilating the enemy. Feels very appropriate, and you're not per se losing the units on the campaign map from that. In fact, you will recover quite a lot of the losses. Here's where it breaks down for me, and what the major issue that I have with the game so far is. You're gonna have to fight a lot and a lot and a lot of battles manually if you're going to win the campaign. If you try not to resolve your way to victory, you're gonna suffer enormously. It's simply not going to work. So the developers have created a situation where in order to win the campaign, you have to fight a lot of these battles. Now, that might sound great if the battles individually were fantastic. But after you fight a couple of battles, you kind of realize they are not so great as advertised. It's not that the gameplay elements of those battles are bad in themselves. It's not that there isn't strategy and tactics to be used. In fact, there is. There's ways to manipulate AI. You deliberately weaken a section of the front line so that they will attack that particular section. Then you annihilate their attack wave, and then you counterattack. You have to be clever with your artillery usage. You have limited supplies. Like, the same resource that you're using to actually shoot your artillery is the same resource that you use to bring soldiers. So there's a lot of great things. Life is cheap, cheaper than artillery shells. So I like the concept of it. What I don't like is when you end up in a situation where you have to fight an insane levels of battles that aren't necessarily very challenging, but you win a battle, or you take a portion of the campaign map, or a significant portion of the campaign map, and you feel like, okay, I put in all this effort, what did I get for it? Nothing. But you still have to put in the effort because you want to win the campaign. I understand World War I was a grinding war of attrition. It wasn't, especially on the Western one, and it wasn't the kind of war that you would generally see portrayed in a video game. But when you're forcing me as a developer to just do battle after battle after battle, because if I try and auto-resolve, I'll just get wiped out or suffer significant losses, national will, you name it. When that's something you're forcing on me as the player, I cannot define that as an enjoyable experience. Simply cannot. There's a lot of nuance to this game. There's a lot of things to say, like you can use chemical weapons, but they're very costly, and you have limited supply. And not only do you have limited supply in each of the individual battle based on the units you've committed in your campaign supply, but you also have to worry about your overall supply on the campaign map. So how you decide to commit your resources is important. That's what makes it worse, actually, because let's look at this situation. I have several forces over here near Verdun, right? If I simply auto-resolve the situation here, I'm going to take ridiculous losses. Would I lose if I were to fight these battles manually? No, I would not lose. But given the situation that exists on the campaign map, given the state of affairs on the campaign map, I'm kind of in the position where I can't just... I feel like this is the kind of game where if you auto-resolve... Like, unless it's a defense battle and it's going to go your way, maybe so, but if it's on defense, it's going to be a problem. Now, some people might be fine with that, but as a player who's played a lot of games over years and who plays games for a living, I gotta tell you, just having to fight these battles over and over and over again, and seeing the same thing in every battle, like just manipulating the AI and attacking a weak position, or even if you don't manipulate the AI, if you're on the offense, you just simply group up your artillery, group up your units, you use your artillery to break the line, you bring in tanks if that's absolutely necessary, and you punch through a front line. And you do this again and again. There's nothing clever or interesting about it. It feels appropriate to the setting. It feels appropriate to, history, what things happened in history. But I gotta tell you, if I have to do 100 battles throughout the campaign, or in just a couple of turns, and they're all pretty much gonna feel the same way, then I'm not sure that's the kind of game I'm interested in playing in. That's something you should know before you decide to pick up this game. Something you should be aware of. The issues. I think the real issue here, not just, it's easy to say it's not resolved. I think there is something of a disconnect between the battle mechanics and the campaign mechanics, what you can achieve in a battle. Like, if I'm going in a battle and I'm slaughtering thousands and thousands of soldiers, like a significant portion of the total enemy force in the region, and then you go on the campaign map and tell me, oh yeah, you achieved nothing. I'm like, why am I bothering? What am I doing here? Because that's something I've already done. It's not particularly difficult either. Like, what am I trying to do here? Like, do I have to do this 4 times a turn, 3 times a turn, attacking from multiple angles, and maybe then I'd achieve a quote-unquote victory? Is that how it's going to play out in this particular game? If that's the case, then, well, unless you're really patient, I don't think this is a game that can be recommended. Which is a shame, because I don't think there's no game that's like it on the market. But maybe that reveals the problems that game developers do have in terms of recreating World War I. Now, final word over here before I end this video. This is a first impressions video after about 5.5 hours into the game. Now, some people are gonna type furiously, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you should put a lot more hours into the game. To which my reply would be, if a game isn't good in the first couple of hours, chances are it's not gonna get better after that. Like, I've played in the endgame in 1918 in the tutorial campaign, I've played in 1916, I've played in 1914 within those 5.5 hours, I've experimented with various things. And the core gameplay that involves fighting a lot of these boring, repetitive battles is not going to change. Even if you blow up the enemy trenches, even if you build a massive trench network, the fundamentals of battle are going to stay the same. They're not going to change. And you either bait the AI into attacking your position and slaughtering them en masse and then take their undefended positions, or even if you have to attack, it's pretty damn simple to attack. You bring artillery, you bombard their positions, then you send units into the trench, and then you fight from trench to trench to trench. It's even great if the enemy has a massive trench network that's interconnected, because that means you have an entry point that's safe from the enemy machine guns, from a lot of the enemy fire. So that's something you use the enemy's own trenches against them. But you have to do this a dozen times or more every single turn. And I think there's few games that could pull it off, where you have to fight a lot of these samey battles every single turn, that would be enjoyable. Very, very few games. It's not enjoyable in Total War. Hell, it's not enjoyable in Empire War, which actually has one of the same issues, because the auto resolve there is bad, and so you have to fight a lot of manual battles or take significant casualties, and you end up in situations where you're fighting pitiful forces that can't stand up to you manually, and wasting precious hours of your life. That's how this game feels. It kind of feels in the same way that Empire War feels, and that's one of my personal issues with that particular title, and they carry over into this game. After all those years, this, I guess you could call it the spiritual successor in a sense to the grinding war of attrition that the Empire War campaign map could feel like. So that's my issue with it. Can it get better? Yes, add keybind so we can use artillery shots, like just being able to shoot the artillery, improve the auto resolve, improve the unit pathfinding, because sometimes you give a unit an order to go from trench to trench and they just go over the top and get slaughtered. It's like, that's not what I decided to do there. But at the moment, it's not a game I can recommend. That's my perspective on it. I think it has great concepts. I think it has great ideas. I think the actual campaign map mechanics themselves in isolation are good, but the gameplay loop between battles and the campaign map isn't great. And I'll say it as bluntly as possible. If you're going into a battle and you're annihilating the enemy, that should have an impact. Even in the context of World War One, because if you were in a World War One situation and say the Germans were marching on Ypres and had killed everyone there that they faced, had wiped the entire map clean of enemies, yeah, that would have been fairly consequential in the war. That's not how those battles played out. Yes, World War One was a war of grinding attrition, and designing a game where you can properly replicate that is, I imagine, a monumental challenge. I do not, however, believe that pushing the player to go through a constant war of attrition where they quote-unquote win battles but not really win them is the solution. Because this is one of the problems, by the way, as I see it, when it comes to designing a game about World War One. World War One was about a long war where victories were few and far between, and very little was achieved on the Western Front for a very, very long period of time, and a lot of people died. That's all well and fair. As players, we strive for success. We strive for victory in battles. And we can, quote-unquote, achieve those victories, but we feel we've achieved actually very little. So how could that be improved? I don't know. I don't have an easy answer to that. I don't think many developers have an easy answer to that, to properly recreate the experience of World War One in a way that isn't genuinely frustrating to play through. But at the moment, I can't recommend this game. It does a lot of things right on a concept level. It fails quite horribly in the execution. Just my first impressions. Maybe I'll change my opinion after, 50 hours in the game. Or maybe I'll be exactly where I started, or maybe I won't even get to 10 hours in the game. Because I can tell you one thing. After the first 2 hours, I was already willing to remove the game from my computer. And it hasn't, now that opinion hasn't changed after 5. That's where I stand. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.